might have been a bit down on Series 2, but I'm clearly in the minority, at least as far as contemporary audiences were concerned. Tennant had established himself as the new face of the show, and the finale had cemented the relationship between the 10th Doctor and Rose as the emotional core of the revival. With a confrontation between two A-list villains and the melodramatic goodbye on Bad Wolf Bay, Doomsday was event television, but the story left an obvious question once the dust had settled. What now? If Series 1 was about reviving the show after the hiatus, and Series 2 was about making the show work with a new lead actor, then Series 3 is about moving the show forward and taking advantage of its steady footing. Doctor Who was now an established primetime staple, and this confidence is visible throughout the various episodes. Story ideas that have worked previously are refined and improved, while a couple of other familiar concepts are interpreted in new ways. Let's take the refinements first. Although Rose should be commended for setting up the entire revival, as a series opener and companion introduction, I think Smith & Jones is the stronger episode of the two. Then there's Gridlock, in which the Doctor returns to New Earth and meets the face of Bo for a third time. Again, the Series 3 example is far superior to both New Earth and the End of the World, although admittedly that's not saying much. We also get another pseudo-historical that features a famous author. Although I enjoy how The Unquiet Dead treats Charles Dickens as a supporting character, making the historical figure the driver of the plot does result in a more streamlined story. It also allows those involved to have more fun, with an abundance of Shakespeare references and a story that better incorporates elements from his work. These three stories all revisit familiar ground, but the visible improvements make each episode feel fresh and worthwhile rather than redundant. This feeling of refinement is complemented by a noticeable improvement in production quality, at least as far as I'm concerned. In the last retrospective, I complained about the visual blandness of a majority of Series 2's episodes. Series 3 completely reverses this trend. These episodes feel warmer, better lit, and less constrained by their budgets, although I'm sure such constraints remained. Perhaps some of this is down to the inevitable improvement of technology, allowing for more convincing special effects at a cheaper price, but it stretches beyond the CGI. I don't know if there was an adoption of more advanced cameras by the BBC around this time, or if the show saw an increase in its budget between Series 2 or 3, or maybe the production team was just more capable after 2 years of practice. Or maybe I'm seeing an improvement that others don't. I'd be interested to know if you notice any tangible difference between Series 2 and 3. All I know is that when I watch the Shakespeare Code or Human Nature or really any episode, their settings feel more extensive than ever before. Even the Earthbound stories look and feel more exciting. As far as interpreting familiar elements in new ways, Series 3 experiments slightly with the more established routines of the revival. The Daleks had become series regulars by this point, and in Daleks in Manhattan they make their fourth appearance in only 3 years. But Daleks in Manhattan takes a newly introspective approach to the titular villains, resulting in a story that questions and examines them more so than the usual Dalek outing. These Daleks fight amongst themselves, question their own biology, and even try to evolve. In a similar vein, Utopia brings back a classic villain for the third finale in a row, with the Master reborn by the end of the episode, leading into a climactic two-parter. But instead of spending 2 episodes on one high-stakes battle, as had been the case with both previous finales, Series 3 does something a little different by essentially letting the villain win. The Sound of Drums builds up to a final confrontation, but ends with the protagonists having the rug pulled from under them. The Last of the Time Lords follows, depicting a world that exists as a result of the Master's victory in the previous episode. It also revolves almost entirely around the companion, with the Doctor incapacitated until the final 10 minutes. I don't think either story is great, although they both have strengths that I'll elaborate on in the ranking video. And neither story is completely subversive either, but I still admire this willingness to experiment with the established tenets of the show. It's the attitude of a series becoming comfortable with its success, willing to capitalise on audience goodwill by challenging expectations, if only slightly. Of course, when it comes to new elements, none were more noticeable than the Doctor's new companion. Replacing an established character is never easy, but this time it must have been particularly unenviable. Not only was Rose incredibly popular, but she was also significant for having bridged the gap between the 9th and 10th Doctors. Companions are usually the point of view character anyway, but when revival fans witnessed their first regeneration, Rose was the character who reassured audiences by remaining with the new Doctor. In losing her, the show had lost its most prominent link to the start of the revival. If you've seen the Series 2 retrospective, then you'll know my issues with Rose's characterisation, but as much as I dislike the dynamic between her and the Doctor, I can't deny its importance to the overall characterisation of the 10th Doctor, or the tone of his first series. It's a big deal, is all I'm saying, but thankfully, they knock it out of the park. I love Martha Jones. I think she's one of the best companions in the show. With that being said, I think her strengths are slightly undermined across the series by a misguided focus on romance, an unfortunate hangover from Series 2. Let's start with the positives. I like how Martha proves herself in the first few episodes. She gets a trip in the TARDIS after impressing the Doctor in Smith & Jones, and her tenure is extended as the series progresses and she continues to demonstrate her strengths. It feels like the relationship between the Ninth Doctor and Rose, but dialed up even further, because the Doctor is more critical of her, but also because Martha is placed in situations that show her to be even more capable. In both Human Nature and The Last of the Time Lords, Martha is essentially the main protagonist. She has to go to extreme lengths to save the day, having to protect a human John Smith from the family of blood and travel across the entire planet to defeat the Master, all on her own. Even outside of these drastic examples, she's given plenty to do, which is refreshing after the more passive characterization of Rose in the previous series. She contributes words to defeat the Carrionites in the Shakespeare Code, she holds her own against the possessed Doctor in 42, and of course she uncovers the Plasmavore in Smith & Jones. Freema Agyeman is incredible in the role, injecting so much charisma into the character. Like I said earlier, Martha is essentially the main protagonist in several episodes, a setup that just wouldn't work if she wasn't so likeable. It's a shame then that so much attention is given to Martha's unrequited love for and attraction to the Doctor. It's something that makes the romantic angle of Series 2 even more frustrating, because it casts a shadow over this otherwise excellent character relationship. The Doctor is mourning the loss of Rose, while Martha is pining after him, and both characters are given the occasional line of insufferable dialogue that undermines their natural chemistry. You get Martha making comments about Rose, for example, expressing mock surprise at the fact she's blonde, or getting annoyed that the Doctor took her to the same planet he took Rose, or making the odd soppy speech, like in The Family of Blood or Evolution of the Daleks, about how she loves the Doctor even though he never looks at her. Likewise, the Doctor makes comments about how Rose would know what to do in the Shakespeare Code, or talks about how Martha isn't replacing her, and it just feels a bit cruel. Even when he's not actively putting her down, he's often quite short with her, certainly more so than he ever was with Rose. He practically tells her off for wasting time with a hug after she was relieved to see him again in Evolution of the Daleks, and completely ignores her whilst they're walking to Lazarus's party in the Lazarus Experiment. I wouldn't mind this aloofness from the Doctor because it makes him seem more alien, but we've already seen him be aware and even receptive to romantic feelings from Rose, so he's obviously not oblivious to them. Even if I had really liked the romance between Rose and the Doctor, I still dislike the choice to lean so heavily into this love triangle because it partly defines Martha's character through a comparison to Rose, rather than letting her stand solely on her own 2 feet. I think these moments only work when they're less about comparing Martha to Rose and more about displaying a subtle coldness that lies within the Doctor. At the end of Gridlock, when Martha refuses to get into the TARDIS, the Doctor asks if she's staying on New Earth, and it's a much better use of this kind of rudeness. It feels like a glimpse of a darker side to the character, however slight, that he would make a comment like that rather than acknowledging Martha's action as an acceptable response to his behaviour. I've spoken before about the ethical questions surrounding the Doctor's taking of companions, and his response here demonstrates a small hint of his unhealthy expectations, namely his aversion to any questions about his manner, especially from someone who he doesn't yet respect as much as his previous companion. Speaking of the Doctor, I'm happy to report that after an uneven debut series, Tennant is now completely at home in the role, and he rectifies every criticism I had of his characterization in Series 2. That's not to say that he isn't still prone to moments of heightened self-importance. This is the series that ends with him becoming Jesus, after all. But now with 2 series under his belt, Tennant's increased pride starts to feel more like a genuine character journey, and his dramatic moments feel less hollow and carry more weight. I think Martha has a lot to do with the increased effectiveness of Series 3's emotional scenes. The introduction of a new companion gives Tennant the opportunity to retell his backstory, something that he didn't need to do with Rose given that she already knew about it. Compared to how Eccleston retold the story of the Time War, Tennant's version feels like another step towards the eventual climax of the Time Lord victorious. He plays up the grandiosity of his people a bit more. His being a Time Lord starts to feel more like a source of pride, with the show emphasising the universal significance of the species, more so than before. They show the Citadel for the first time in the revival and allow Tennant to give a more romantic description of Gallifrey and his people. It makes sense that this series would be the one to bring back the Master, because he's a character that embodies the heightened importance and pomposity of the Time Lords even more than Tennant, essentially carrying these traits to their logical conclusion. Martha even comments on the stuffy name of the species once she hears it. It's probably a coincidence, but this is all supported by a slightly increased willingness to reference the show's history. As well as the Citadel on Gallifrey and a traditional Time Lord, we see the faces of the classic Doctors for the first time in the revival, drawn in John Smith's Journal of Impossible Things. It's a small detail, but I think it goes a long way to reinforce this characterisation of the Doctor. He's always been a man carrying the weight of his own history, but now we get to visualize it. A new companion also brings with them a new family, and after the sidelining of Jackie in Series 2, an increased focus on Martha's family is a welcome return. If you were being cynical, you could say that Series 3 repeats the emotional beats of Series 1 by having Martha's family, particularly her mother, disapprove of the Doctor just like Jackie did. But Series 3 makes up for it by making Francine more openly antagonistic towards the Doctor. She never really warms to him, unlike Jackie, and ends up unwittingly undermining him and assisting the main antagonist of the series in the process. That whole sequence of Martha's family being arrested in The Sound of Drums is absolutely phenomenal. It's so dramatic with the stakes constantly raising, but the focus is always on the family, keeping it personal despite the overblown presentation and pacing. The series doesn't focus on the family too much, but I think there's enough to get a sense of who they are. You get a great introduction in Smith and Jones, a more thorough interaction in The Lazarus Experiment, and then a few little cutaways before the finale in which their presence feels suitably justified. I wonder if it's this strong family dynamic that makes Series 3 feel so foreboding. More so than other series of the show, I feel anxious for the characters in the earlier episodes because of what I know is coming. When I see Martha laughing and joking in Smith and Jones, I almost want to shout at the screen to warn her about what's going to happen. I think it's because of Martha's prominent role in the finale. She's only been with the Doctor for one series, and she's having to deal with the Master almost single-handedly by the end of it. Not only that, but the series ends with her family having been tortured for an entire year. Part of Martha's reason for leaving is to look after them after what they'd been through. They don't really expand on this for understandable reasons, but it's a harrowing situation if you stop and think about it. This increased sense of foreboding could also be the result of fairly consistent theming across the various episodes, which is favoured over other potentially unifying ideas. There isn't much in the way of politics, for example, outside of a few vague mentions here and there. They'll have Hutchinson make an offensive comment to Martha in Human Nature, for example, but the episode as a whole never delves into the wider issue of race in Edwardian England. 42 touches on the issue of illegally plundering natural resources in the same way that Gridlock is kind of a commentary on traffic and pollution. It's a bit of a stretch to call either of these stories political, though. Even The Sound of Drums, in which the Master becomes Prime Minister, is more focused on the character drama. Maybe there's a point about executive overreach or the weaponization of the government, but it's clear that this isn't a priority. The political setting is just, well, the setting. But whatever Series 3 lacks in political messaging, it more than makes up for thematically, with a heavy focus on death and mortality. It might be one of the most consistent series in this regard. Not every story is about death, but there's a clear through line that weaves in and out of various episodes. Gridlock sees the face of Bo, one of the oldest creatures in the universe, finally die. Utopia depicts the last humans in existence struggling to outlive the universe itself, while the Daleks are contemplating evolution to avoid their own extinction. The family of Blood are fighting to be immortal, Lazarus is trying to recapture his youth and similarly extend his life, and the series ends with the Master, a character obsessed with survival above all else, finally deciding to die. It's an admirable attempt at greater tonal consistency, and something that gives even weaker episodes a slight boost. As I hope I've demonstrated over the course of this video, there is so much to love about Series 3. It provides superlative examples of the show's various formulas, but also contains new interpretations of familiar ideas. The episodes all have a greater sense of visual flair, and although not every story is amazing, there's usually enough quality material to make up for any other deficiencies. I might complain about the romantic subplot between the two leads, but this issue is minor when compared to the obvious strengths of Martha and the 10th Doctor. Like I said at the beginning of this video, Series 3 is a confident series of television. The growing pains that hindered Series 2 are gone, and the end result is a slick and impressive set of episodes. Thanks for watching this retrospective video. Apologies for the long gap between Series 2 and 3, I'm hoping to be a bit more regular with the uploads from now on. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on Series 3, and let me know yours in the comments, I'm genuinely interested to read them. I still have more to say about these episodes, so stay tuned for the ranking video, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.